2nd, 2012 is called to order.
Good evening. In accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act, NJSA 1046 et sec, adequate notice of this meeting has been provided by advertising in the Star Ledger and Luz Americana newspapers and by distribution to the administrative offices of the Newark Public Schools. A copy of the meeting notice was forwarded to City Hall for posting. This is a special advisory board meeting for Monday night, July 2nd, 2012.
Please stand for the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call.
Ms. Baskerville-Richardson?
Here.
Ms. Davis-Spate? Mr. Jeffries?
Here.
Mr. Kenny? Dr. Lamore?
Here.
Mr. Lewis?
Here.
Ms. Matthias?
Here.
Dr. McCreary?
Here.
Ms. Pinto-Marin? Quorum is present.
We will now proceed to the rest of the agenda. For the benefit of those of you who have been so kind as to join us here this evening, we will have a presentation on the charter leases, which will be followed by a Q&A by advisory board members, followed by public commentary participation, which will be limited to 45 minutes on the agenda items only. And following that, there will be a vote by the advisory board members and then adjournment. So we will now have the charter leases presentation.
I'm gonna carry your stuff for you.
No,
You sure?
yeah.
Sorry about that.
No.
This, some of the other screens are in front of us.
Good evening, Advisory Board Chair, Superintendent Anderson, members of the community, assorted staff, other stakeholders. I know we have some council people in the room. I have seen Councilwoman Crump and Councilman Baraka. Are there any other council people present? Thank you. This evening, we're here to discuss the renting of district facilities for charter school leases. We will be discussing a number of varied options. With my presentation, I hope to answer the following questions: the why, the when, the where, and the how. In the 10-11 school year, the advisory board adopted a policy, Newark Public Schools Policy 3271. That policy contains specific language relating to the board's commitment and wanting their goals to be consistent with educating all of Newark's children at the highest levels. It also indicated that the district is committed to making a range of quality options available to Newark students and their families. The district would also consider leasing available space in unused or underutilized facilities to the extent that such space was available and that it served both the district's educational program or operational needs and expanded the number of high-quality educational options for Newark's children. In Newark currently, we have 45,257 seats available throughout the district. Of that 45,257, approximately 8,129 are empty. If you look at the pie that is located on this slide, you will see that 34,265 of those students sit in NPS facilities and are the district's enrollment. You will also see that in what looks like black, but I think it's a dark purple, there are 2,863 seats, which in fiscal year 13 are occupied by current charters. You will see the green segment, which indicates that there are 8,129 empty seats. Of that 8,129, there are 1,803 in the orange segment that will be for the new charter schools leases that we are going to be discussing this evening. That leaves a total of 6,326 empty seats, even after we have accommodated the charters that were in our schools in the 11-12 school year and will be in the 12-13 year, and the new charter leases. In order to look at what has happened to the district, you have to go back probably 5 years, 5 to 6. And this chart, we used it in our budget presentation earlier in March, indicates a number of things. First, we need to understand that NPS's population since fiscal year 08 has declined by approximately 9.1%. That is indicated at the top of the chart with the black line with the diamonds on it. Charters, on the other hand, grew an average of 18.9% annually since fiscal year 08. That is indicated by the terracotta or rust line on the bottom of the chart with the boxes. The state has projected that in fiscal year 13, we will have approximately 11,300 students attending charters in the Newark district at a cost of almost $165 million. That is depicted on the last bar on the chart to the most right. What you will notice is that we have also projected a lower number for that charter enrollment. We have said that there will be 10,100 students, and we have budgeted $148 million for that. So look to the two lines and the final bar on the right. Newark is facing a very difficult financial environment now, and it will only worsen as we go forward into fiscal year 13. This year, fiscal year 12-13, we had to use non-recurring items to keep our budget flat. What that means is we use dollars that will not exist in 13-14. In order to balance the budget, NPS utilized $47 million of non-recurring sources. That was depicted in A, which is approximately $8 million used to fund our fund balance for the fiscal 12-13 year. B, we moved forward $21.9 million of approximately $33 million that we received from court-restored aid in fiscal year 12. We anticipated this deficit and made sure we had money put aside to offset it. And in C, once again, we talk about the revenues that we reduced by lowering the state's projection for charter school payments. That is actually a gap of $17 million. At your leisure, you will be able to look at the chart below and compare where we have used those revenue sources. Maintaining our facilities has a significant annual cost. The budget that you see depicted before you is purely for the maintenance and operation of our facilities. Ladies and gentlemen, it is important that you remember that our schools average in age 87 years old. We have many schools that were built in the mid to late 1800s, 1860, 1833, 1889. We have some schools built in the 1900s, and even fewer built in the year 2000 and on. you will see that this sum includes salaries, it includes maintenance, it includes supplies, and ensures that we are able to maintain our buildings. But it is at a hefty price, a price where money could be put into the academic program and therefore not be spent on maintaining older buildings that are also underutilized. This year, our superintendent felt that it was important, based on the conversations we had last year, that we also include some educational obligations for our charter school partners. These obligations are consistent with the district's policy that I mentioned before on leasing facilities and outlines commitments in 3 major areas. In terms of collaboration, we want to share best practices. We will share with them our best practices and they will share with us. We want to promote positive dialogue and develop mutually beneficial partnerships. Equity. We want to serve all students, abide by the same rules for suspension, and reflect the local catchment or neighborhood area's proportion of students with special needs. Please note that that is dependent on NJDOE approval. The current law does not indicate that for charters, but we are going to hold the charter partners in the district to that educational obligation. Transparency and accountability. They will use PowerSchool, which is our student information database, or a compatible system. They will participate in the development and implementation of data dashboards that will showcase side by side district school performance and charter school performance. Schools that are currently under consideration for leasing in NPS facilities. We have 2 different types of leases. We have short-term leases and we have long-term leases. For our short-term leases, we have Newark Legacy, which is the only co-location this year with an NPS school, and that will be at Madison Avenue. We have North Star, which will be a sole short-term lease at the Dr. Martin Luther King School. We have Paulo Freire, who will co-locate with another charter, Great Oaks, which is located at Burnett Street. In terms of our long-term leases, these will be sole occupancies, but they will be of a longer term. 100 Legacy will reside at the West Side NAF building, formerly known as Morton Street, and Team Academy will reside at 18th Avenue. We've prepared a chart that summarizes what the various leases reflect. Newark Legacy will be co-located once again at Madison Avenue. It will be a 2-year term. There are no rights of first refusal for purchase should the district choose to sell that school, and there are no options to buy. The rental rate will be $5.25 per square foot, which includes services and operational costs. At North Star, we will have them and Dr. MLK. Once again, it's a 2-year term, no right of first refusal, no option to buy, and the $5.25 market rate. Paulo Freire will locate at Burnett Street School with the same rental rate and the same options and term. 100 Legacy, which will be located at the West Side NAF, will have a 7-year initial term and may go as high as 25 years. They do have a right of first refusal if the district opts to sell its building, and they have no option to buy. Their first-year lease excuse me, will be at $4. The second year will be at $5, and the third year of the lease will be at $6. There will be escalation at each of the incremental renewal terms, which would be 7 years apiece. Let me also note that that particular lease and any lease above 5 years requires the Department of Education, specifically the Commissioner of Education's approval. Team Academy will locate at 18th Avenue. They will have a 10-year initial term with up to 30 years as a lease. The right of first refusal, the right of first refusal, they have that. They also have the option to buy. Note that in their first year, the cost of maintenance and operations of that building will be their responsibility and will serve as their rental payment. Subsequent to that, they will have a $3 a year rate. Sure, excuse me, ladies and gentlemen. Short-term leases. Characteristics of a short-term lease. The tenant is responsible for all regular maintenance and repair and cleaning of their premises. The tenant pays additional operating expense charges when NPS schools are not in session. The tenant must retain district security guards for which they will pay the full cost. Excuse me. In addition to tenant's premises, the tenant pays proportionate share of shared spaces in the building, namely the auditorium, the gymnasium, the cafeteria. Long-term leases. The tenant is responsible for all repairs and maintenance, including both capital and structural repairs. The tenant is responsible for cleaning, utilities, custodians, and security guards. The tenant is obligated, subject to DOE approval, to give preference to applications submitted by students in the district catchment or neighborhood area, and will utilize its best efforts to include the same demographics as district schools for the percentage of special ed and ELL students. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes my presentation. That's all right.
We will now move to questions and answers by the advisory board members regarding the charter leases.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Mr. Lewis.
just two quick questions. One, there was another school that was on the list, New Day Charter School. Is that still?
It is my understanding that New Day Charter School will not be going forward fiscal year 12-13,
Okay, and
which is why it was removed. So they are not renting from us.
and Willie Mae Jenkins as well.
Lily Mae Jenkins is also not renting from us this year and will not be moving forward.
Okay, and also, you said, I noticed that you said in the presentation that we will hold the charter school partners to accepting special needs children pending approval by DOE. And we said that we will hold them responsible. How can we hold them responsible if it's not initially up to us if they accept charter school, special needs children or not?
Mr. Lewis, we intend to hold the charters responsible. It does require the commissioner's approval, and the district will go forward to seek that approval and indicate its interest in having that as a term of the lease.
Let me actually jump in if that's okay. Let me explain how enrollment currently works and what a lot of folks are working towards, including charter partners. The law requires in New York, in New Jersey State, just like it does in New York State and Washington State and Washington DC, which isn't a state, they all require the following approach to charter enrollment, which is that a family submits an application and there's a lottery that occurs. What happens in some states, which is not true in New Jersey currently, is that there are some laws that allow for preferences by catchment area. We don't currently have that in the New Jersey charter law, but it is something that has been successfully used elsewhere to ensure diversity of student recruiting. So that's something that would require legal change, and it's something that I know a lot of our charter partners have been seeking, as we have as well. That's just a legal piece. It wasn't something that anyone did as a result of anything other than the way the law was written. The second piece is that when we run remember the individual school reports that we've run for every school that we shared with each of you? In those school reports, there are different ways of looking at the student population in terms of race, socioeconomic need, special education, English language learners, and we are creating an actual dashboard for every school in Newark, regardless of whether it's charter or not charter. We even hope to get the private schools involved so that we can look and see, we can compare apples to apples, including how the student population looks. Even within NPS, we have magnets and comprehensives that are being compared with different student populations. We have K-8s, in different sides of town within different student populations. So we basically ask any charters that are leasing space with NPS to agree to give their data, and then we can all look and see what's the degree of need of the student population, and we can look at results and see how is that the same or different depending on different kinds of student needs. That's a very big, to Ms. Wilson's point, that's a very big accountability tool for everyone, right? Because that will allow the charters to actually see, are we indeed getting results in serving, a certain kind of student population or others, and us as well, so that we can actually compare within NPS and across all schools our progress. So part of it too is transparency, and we have to do legal changes, which we don't have the authority to do with the wave of a pen, but we can also do it through public transparency, and I think that's something that a lot of the charter partners as well as NPS schools should embrace, because we need to actually look at results alongside of student need, and I think over time we need to work hard, not just in the charter sector, but in our own schools to bring more diversity to our schools overall, because certain schools have a student population that are in more academic need than others, and I think over time we're only going to succeed if we have diversity across the system.
But is it, Madam Superintendent, is it also, true that since the charter school is a different district, they have their own government body, they could choose to not overturn that data to us as well?
Well, two things on that. One is that anyone who is leasing space that we are proposing to lease space to has agreed to do so already. That's number one. Number two, we are actually seeking private resources to do data auditing, even of our own schools, because none of us can afford for us to get results without having people verify that, in fact, the data is real and clear in our own schools too. And number three, we are pursuing a data sharing agreement with the state, which would allow us access to data across the board, and that is likely to be successful, regardless of whether or not someone is leasing in our space or not.
Ms. Matthias.
In regards to the charter partners having access to district data, we're using PowerSchool or some other instrument. And we talked about this before. How do we protect the district's data and making sure that they are not accessing our student records, our family records, and using it in the wrong way?
So there are federal laws called FERPA that have very strict protocols on data sharing, which is why even when we actually ask for charter data, there has to be a legal agreement. And if the other were to happen, there would have to be a legal agreement as well. There are all kinds of firewalls, which I'm sure Mr. Zartarian can talk with you about further, but there are very strict data protocols that we are obligated to follow NPS and the charter sector around student information. So, and I know you shared before there was some concern, and what I'd said is, that's very serious. If there's any evidence that there's something we need to investigate, we will, because that's a serious thing that governs all student data systems across the board.
And then my other question is, in terms of tenant obligated to give preference to applications and utilize its best efforts, what evidence will we be using to determine what best efforts is?
So you're talking about in terms of serving students that reflect, again, we can share, again, and I'm not sure if you were on the board when we showed them the individual school progress reports have a very clear indicator of student population. It looks at it by similar schools and surrounding areas. And so we will be able to share with this board and others, how do our schools by ward compare? How do they look across wards? How do they look between charter and non-charter? And that transparency, it'll be right there in front of us. And I think we'll see some disparity in need, not only within charters, but I think across our own schools. And that is something we'll be able to share by school and across the entire system using one clear marker of student population.
So if we're looking at the data and we see that a charter that was leased in a facility that previously served 20% special needs students and now they are only serving 2%, that doesn't meet the educational goals that we have outlined in the lease. Is it just a matter of saying, well, we'll try to get more special ed students, or like what's the recourse there?
Yeah, I mean, I would encourage us to think about need as not being just special education.
No,
right?
absolutely.
And I think that it would allow us, the way the leases are written, it would allow us to go to that particular school and to say, we want you to set some, aggressive goals around recruitment. And if they don't meet those goals, it would allow us the opportunity to pull the lease.
Mr. Lamort, and then Mr. Jeffries.
Thank you. Madam Superintendent.
I'm sorry, Dr. Lamort. Sorry.
Thank you. We've been in co-locations now for a while. Do we know how these co-locations has affected our kids' test scores, attendance, GPA?
Ladies and gentlemen, please, there will be time for public participation, but we would like to use our time wisely this evening.
So we did share with the board this summer the results of school closures and consolidations. We looked at some of them, you don't have enough overtime data. In other words, you can't look at NJASC for an entire year in a school that has only been co-located or consolidated for a year. So we had limited data, but we did look at retention, and we looked at attendance. We looked at things you could see even within the course of a year. We looked at suspension incidents, et cetera, and that was data we shared with the board this summer, and basically it showed similar distribution of those things that you would see in our comparable schools. So on those important indicators, there was no demonstrable impact. We want to do better than that as a district, but it wasn't, there was no corollary between those leading indicators and either the consolidated sites or the co-located sites. The more correlative factors, which I think we're all talking about here that are so important, had to do with students who were behind remained behind, and that was true for us across the district, regardless of whether or not they were in a co-located space or a consolidated space. That, to me, that's the big takeaway from the data. It didn't help or hurt that. To me, that's not a good outcome. We want everything we do should be.
It's such a limited data that our ability to be able to make I think, a clear and informed decision hurts our ability to be able to grow. I mean, I understand that we want to be able to have a lot of options for our kids, but we've yet to talk about what the emotional impacts are of moving kids and how that's affecting their grades, how that's affecting their performance.
So I would just say, to me, the most obvious and poignant thing in our data, which predates any co-locations and any consolidations, which to me is a horrible travesty to our kids, is the fact that we have certain schools that have persistently not delivered on our kids' potential, and that hasn't been impacted in a good or a bad way, which I think is, I think that's the issue we need to be really diving in about, is how do we get more resources into our system, literally, which is some of the information that, which is some of the information that Ms. Wilson shared, to improve the quality of our programming, our facilities, and also how do we get more options that show, regardless of what your student need, the need of the student population, that results can occur. And I think that we have an opportunity to do that.
And I have one more question, if you'll indulge me. We talk a lot about collaboration, and charter schools have been in Newark for a long time. My question is, what kind of real collaboration has the district and charter schools really done, and how has that impacted curriculum? How has that impacted, on the ground curriculum?
Yep, so this year I can just give you several examples. I think there has been an unfortunate disconnect that has occurred, and I would say it goes both ways. And this year we made a concerted effort through grants and through team building and through joint retreats, and I'll just give you, and that is different than it's been in the past, to say it's about all of our children, it's about everyone succeeding, and let's learn from the best of what's going on. So I'll give you some examples of what happened as a result of that mindset shift. One example is that an NPS school and a district and a charter school went on a staff retreat together and did shared professional development that focused on curriculum and other work. Another example is that several of the charters have done something that NPS has not done, which is developed very clear interim assessments that are aligned to curriculum, and they have shared those with some of their NPS partners to see if that would actually help them improve the quality of their school. There have been joint sort of social emotional projects, to your point about the social emotional piece. There have been all kinds of joint activities, service projects, and community building activities that go beyond academics. And there are several that have been planning ongoing PD even this summer that kind of bring the best to bear. There's a math interim assessment tool that one of our charters has used very successfully that a bunch of our math teachers got very excited about, and they're running a session for them over the summer. These are examples, small and big, of things that have started to happen this year when we've sent the message, it's about excellence. And if something is figured out in one part of our city, whether it's a charter, a private school, and we want to do more with private schools, or a public school, that we should be spreading those promising practices across the board. The way to operationalize that across the board also is we've talked about creating a web portal where folks can actually post tools across the board and pull it down. So I think we're at the very front end, but we saw some very tangible, and I think if you went and talked to some families in those schools and practitioners in those schools, they would share some pretty promising practices from this school year.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Jeffries was next, and Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson, for that presentation. Thank you, Madam Superintendent. I just want to make sure I understand a few things, Madam Superintendent, Ms. Wilson. So as I take from the presentation, right now we have over 8,100 just empty spaces in our schools right now?
That is correct.
Okay. And I understand we have to pay for the maintenance and utility costs and the energy costs of that space we're not using. Is
Yes,
that right?
Mr. Chair.
Ladies and gentlemen, please, we really want to hear all the speakers.
Thank you.
Once a
What-
school is open, we have to maintain the building as though it's fully occupied.
If we did not lease these spaces to these public charter schools, what would we do with these spaces next year?
Those spaces would remain empty and unoccupied because we do not have children to fill those schools.
And what would the cost be to the district of the maintenance and energy costs of these empty spaces that we wouldn't be using?
In my presentation, I would say a portion of our 76 million that was listed would be the cost of maintaining those buildings. In the case of 18th Avenue, I know that our maintenance for 18th over the last 5 years has been approximately $1.5 million.
Per year?
So if you took 18th Avenue and divided it by 5, you know, you're talking about a couple $100,000 a year in terms of just maintenance.
So the bottom line is, if we just let the space sit empty, we have to pay for that space. That's gonna incur costs to the district.
There are costs, Madam Chair.
Please.
There are costs associated. It's not that we would have to pay because we do not have a mortgage on any of our buildings, but we do have costs of maintaining or operating a school.
Right. Now, what's the total? Can you give me the total rent, the total rental payments, the total amount of money the district will receive based upon leasing these spaces? Is it a couple million? I understand. I'm not. I just make sure I'm clear about that.
It's approximately somewhere, I think, in the neighborhood of 5 to. We were actually calculating that number this evening, but because as charters were falling off, we have not had an opportunity to do the total number. But I'd say we would be safe if we looked at approximately $500,000 to $700,000 a year.
Per
A year.
So each one. So about
all of our leases.
So about $2.5 million to $3 million altogether.
Annually?
I thought you said roughly $500,000 per.
No, I said per year, including all leases that I'm talking about.
All 5 put together.
Today.
Okay.
Okay.
All 5 put together. And as I understand it, we're then reinvesting those monies into district programs to extend the school day, to add technology-based programs at our district schools, to provide adult ed at our district schools. Is that?
It is our intent that income from the rental will be used to help us with some capital expenditures associated with making sure some of our buildings are properly maintained. For example, in the case, and I'll give 18th again, we've had scaffolding around that building since 2004. The masonry issues, the roofing issue, the boiler issue, none of those have been resolved. And as you continue to defer maintenance, I looked at our 2005 long-range facilities plan, and it in fact reflected that many of the buildings we are talking about this afternoon were considered educationally obsolete back then and should have been replaced. So as you continue to defer maintenance, it becomes harder to clean, it becomes harder to keep the building systems functioning at an optimal level.
Okay. I understand with the short-term leases, if after the 2 years are up, if some of these programs that we're doing in the district are successful, you know, some of the Renew School programs, some of the new district schools, some of the proposals that we have to improve what we're doing within the district, and if we get families that come back to the district, we can reclaim that space if we're growing over the next couple of years. Is that
Yes,
true?
we can, because that's why we're entering into short-term leases. Even some of our longer-term leases have specific language in them that indicates that the district has the ability to use that space. If, let's say, for example, someone took a school or is renting a school and is not occupying that entire school, the district has a need, then we can move back into that building if it's a long-term lease and use the space that we need, in effect creating a co-location. There would be no monetary transaction. The lease amount would be reduced by the amount of square footage that the district would occupy.
Right.
Mr. Jeffries, if you don't have a question right now, could we go to someone
I'm
else
sorry.
and then
Okay,
come
I had
back?
a couple more, but that's fine.
Okay.
Whatever.
No, I'm not trying to cut you off. You have questions ready now?
Well, I did have a quick one,
Okay.
if you don't mind, Madam Chair, about 18th Ave, because I know that's a very old building. And I know,
Built in, I think, 1889.
but even beyond that, I know over the last few years, I remember when we were going to the state, because a couple years ago, the board worked hard to get the state through the SDA to renovate these buildings and to replace these buildings. And I know we had testimony before the state legislature about this. Part of the reason we joined the lawsuit a couple years ago was to fight for these facilities. But I remember 18th Ave was a building that we really didn't have the resources to maintain. Could you flesh that out, please, Ms. Wilson?
Can you be a little bit more specific in your question, Mr. Jeffrey, so that I can understand?
How much would it cost the district?
Okay.
to put 18th Avenue into a place where we'd be comfortable with our kids?
In 2007, 18th Avenue was assessed by the SDA. At that time, in 2007 dollars, they indicated that the building required approximately $6 million in capital expenditures to make it properly habitable in terms of its boiler, in terms of its roof, in terms of its masonry, which is why it has scaffolding outside. I think it's also slated for window replacements, among other things. At today's cost, that would probably be somewhere in the neighborhood of, I would say, probably $15 million in today's construction dollar costs.
Okay, last question, Madam Chair. Same question for Morton Street, for the other long-term lease.
While I do not have an assessment, not all of our schools have been assessed by the SDA, but Morton Street has needs of a roof. There are masonry issues and there are window issues at Morton, and I think there are also door issues, both external and interior.
Okay.
So you'd probably be looking at a couple $1 million.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Lewis.
With the 18th Avenue long-term leases, there are two issues I have. One is for Teen Academy, and this lease is not being to Teen Academy, it's to Kingston Educational Holders. And on this lease, it could be leased to Teen Academy or its affiliates. So that means at any time, Kingston Educational Holding Crew could come in and move out Teen Academy and put a new school. The other thing is, I believe that there's a conflict with this because Kingston Educational Holding have a conflict of interest because the founder partner has a personal relationship or a partner relationship with the Commissioner of Education, Chris Cerf. And so the 10-year lease with 2 consecutive 10 years will make it 30 years. How can we really justify? How can we justify, Ms. Wilson? How can we justify, or Madam Superintendent, justify this company having this building? What is their track record? We don't know their interests. All we know is right now they're interested in Teen Academy, but this states in this lease that they could pull Teen Academy out and put another school at any period of time when they feel necessary.
Mr. Lewis, I didn't hear all of your question, but let me try to speak. And I was asking for information, Ms. Crawford. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Lewis, I apologize. Our lease will in fact be with Team Academy. Be clear that, as we've indicated before, 18th Avenue does have the need for significant renovations. There are bonds available at the state level that are called SAB bonds. Those bonds are not available to the district. No, they're not. Those bonds are not available to the district for usage. Therefore, Team would occupy 18th Avenue and will probably go for the QZAB bonds, which are available to them. They will use that funding in order to renovate the building. And you notice they also have, in my presentation, I indicated an option to buy. That is the only lease with an option to buy. Okay? Kingston Holding has an interest in the bonds. So it's a little bit complex, but the actual lease will be with Team Academy.
So that means that the language of this resolution should change then from Teen Academy or its affiliates to just Teen Academy. Am I correct?
What does your resolution say? I I think the wording on the resolution says team or its affiliates, right? So Kingston Holding is considered an affiliate. In order for team to qualify for the bonding, they need to have a holding, because they, like us, cannot bond for themselves. They can't do that. So you have to have somebody who can manage the bonding component, but you are still leasing the property. Let me be clear. Team will be the leaseholder for 18th Avenue.
Mr. Kenny and then Ms. Matthias.
Just have a question regarding the QZAP. I think they received approval from New Jersey Economic Development Authority, and I was looking at the bond online, and it was the $25 million. They did receive approval, but it was for 85 Custer Avenue, 21 Ashland Street, 333 Clinton Place, renovations and improvements to 909 Broad Street and 18 Norfolk Street. So I called the EDA, and they said they can't transfer the funds to any other project besides the projects that they were approved for. So is there any other approval that they received that they're going to try to apply to a lease space in our district?
My understanding is that the bonding is transferable, and that is received from an external legal opinion.
That's from the external legal opinion?
From a legal opinion we received from the external law firm. Okay?
Well, is it something that can I mean, I'm not sure whether.
I think Ms. Wilson's commented that bond counsel issued an opinion that it's transferable. Is that correct, Ms. Wilson?
That is correct.
And the reason why I'm asking that question because they also received another bond.
We had originally, Mr. Kinney,
I'm sorry.
We had originally received that question from you, which is why we went to external counsel.
Okay.
To determine whether or not it was transferable.
Is there anything in writing that we can receive a copy of so we can, because it's a conflict because last week I reached out to regarding the same question and they just said that, and it's actually called two offices, they said they can't transfer the funds from what the approval was assigned for, and they said they had to rebond if that was the case. So, I mean, if there's something that can be provided in writing to give us some security about what we're deciding on. Second thing, there were two charter schools that were on the table. We're just trying to figure out, can you give us some information on what happened to Lily Mae Jenkins and also New Day?
It is my understanding that they will not be going forward as approved charter schools for the 12-13 school year.
There's
Excuse me, sir. Can the superintendent respond?
there is
That's the principle.
there's a process. There's a three-part process that happens. There are three things that we did. So there are three things that we, as we've shared with the board and as are reflected in the leases, we only want to lease space to charters that meet a very high bar. And that means that we are, the sort of thing that we have, we only want charters that, number one, we believe have promise of delivering student achievement results that are good, and two, that will be effective partners such as the criteria we've laid out here. In other words, sharing our data, recruiting students from the catchment, et cetera, right? So we only offered leases to those that we felt met those criteria. And the way in which we approached it is, number one, the state has a readiness checklist that has many parts to it, and it's gotten more rigorous. In other words, just because you receive a charter doesn't necessarily mean you get the green light to open, because so you receive a charter and then you get a whole other checklist of stuff you have to do and a whole other checklist of stuff that you do. So you could progress, and then at a certain point, the state may actually say, you haven't met your readiness benchmarks. That's one thing. The other thing that happens is there's a local philanthropic collaborative of local grassroots funders that essentially only want to fund charters that are actually promising and are going to get student achievement results. They do even more than the state. So they actually meet prospective leaders, they interview board members, because it's hard to assess for new charters. You want new folks, but you want to make sure there's a high bar. So we also read the results of their inquiries, if you will. And then a third thing that we did on top of that actually is to have conversations ourselves to make sure that the charters were clear about some of the things we're asking for, data, collaboration, that kind of stuff. So as a result of those three buckets, and you can, read about, everyone's journey is different, but those are the three quality bars that we considered. And therefore, not every charter that is, seeking to start in Newark, we're not bringing every one of those and asking the board to vote on leases for them, because we believe the bar should be quite high for those that we are asking for leases, that we are requesting leasing space that.
Ms. Matthias and Mr. Jeffries.
With that in mind, I'm just wondering, why then are we offering a long-term lease to 100 Legacy when they are a new school as well?
So part of the reason why, that's why I just described that the three pieces, again, we wouldn't want to not offer lease space to anyone new. That's not what we're saying. So the reason why the ones we placed on here, it's because the readiness benchmarks along the way have been met by everyone. The local grassroots philanthropic community has, through their own rigorous process, deemed them to be promising based on the quality of the leader, based on the quality of the board, based on the quality of the plan, based on the quality of the education, and because our team felt like they were committed to the principles of equity and collaboration. So they had to meet all of those pieces in order for us to recommend a lease. We wouldn't, I don't think the board intended through the original policy, nor are we recommending a policy that would exclude new.
No. I'm saying why a 7-year and up to 25-year lease for them as opposed
to a short-term, I see what
short-term.
you're saying. Well, we still have protections in our leases, as Mr. Lewis pointed out.
Superintendent
in the event that people are not, I see what you're saying. I thought you meant.
There is.
So just as a result, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Ms.
So
Matthias, in specific to the question you're asking, in the lease for Legacy, we have throughout the life of the lease, the tenant, in the reasonable determination to be made by the state district superintendent, must comply at all times during the term with all conditions set forth in the tenant's charter and all requirements set forth in NJSA 18A 36A-1 and NJAC 6A:11-1.1, and shall provide landlord with all annual reports submitted pursuant to NJAC 6A:11-2.2 and all renewal applications submitted pursuant to NJAC 6A:11-2.3. So that is the, for want of a better term, the exit strategy, should they not comply with both the state's regulations and the state district superintendent's assessment of their success.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Kenny.
I'm
I'm sorry, Mr. Jeffries is next,
okay.
and then Mr. Kenny.
I have a question related to Board Member Matthias's question, because I think there are legitimate concerns about such a long-term lease with a new charter that hasn't opened up yet. But are there enrollment-related criteria built into the lease? I mean, to the extent the school has difficulties meeting enrollment, is that a part of what you just read? Because I want to make sure I'm understanding that.
It leaves a broad latitude for the superintendent, and unfortunately, she's stepped away for a minute. The lease indicates that subject to her determination, in addition to them meeting the state requirements. So I would say that if they are unable to raise enrollment, it would be something that the state district superintendent would take under consideration. They would, in fact, probably be unable to make their financial obligation, which would be a default of their rent.
Right. And that would be a breach of the lease?
And default of their lease.
Right. And default of the lease means the lease doesn't exist, we can reclaim the space.
As a lawyer, I'm sure you know what deficit.
And then last question. On the long-term leases, I understand it that the tenant has to pay for the repairs and the maintenance of the building, which we don't have the money to pay for.
We
right?
don't have money to pay for rent, maintenance and capital expenditures. There is no capital budget, as you know, and there's no ability for the district to bond in order to get capital monies. The SDA has had a program. We started our long-range facility plan, I think, in 1999. We are in our 4th iteration of that plan, which was supposed to have been a 5-year plan. In terms of expenses for the long-term leases, the characteristics that I mentioned associated with a long-term lease include the cost of capital and structural repairs, all repairs and maintenance.
Mr. Kenny?
A question is regarding, I'm sure within their charters and within the district, they submitted a projection plan, how many students they project to have by whatever year they want to meet max capacity. Do you have the numbers as to what those numbers look like? Because my assumption would be the more, the more charters we lease to, the expectation is that we help facilitate their growth. So
Are we talking about
what is
100 legacy?
well,
in particular?
can you go through each one, please?
In the same chart we shared with you earlier, Mr. Kenny, let's go forward. North Star. In 2012, 2013, there are 174 students that they propose servicing. At full capacity at that location, they would intend to be 435 students.
Absolutely.
Okay? There's also North Star Academy. Hold on, this chart is a little bit old. Just that one? Okay, Team Spark is at Carver. So Team Schools is looking in total to serve 1,790 students in the 12-13 school year, and their current enrollment is 1,479. At full capacity, they will be at 4,500 students.
4,500 students?
4,500.
And currently they're at
I
1,000?
think they're at 1,479.
Okay.
Okay? 100 Legacy intends to serve 300 students in the 12-13 school year, and at full capacity, we want to be at 700 students.
700?
Yeah.
Okay.
And Paulo Ferrer intends to serve 80 students in the 12-13 school year, and at full capacity would be at 320 students.
And Newark Legacy? Oh, no, I'm sorry. Newark Legacy?
Newark Legacy intends to serve 240 students in the 12-13 school year, and at full capacity, we would be at 540 students.
And maybe this, are there any other charter schools that are there any other charter schools that will be looking for space? I guess, are there any charter schools that are in planning year for next year that are looking for space in the district as well?
That I do not have the answer to.
Okay. And maybe this might not be the question for this evening, but I guess their growth plan, how does that affect the district in terms of our resources, our ability to make sure that we're able to hire, do the things that we need to do for our district? Is there any, and again, it goes back into
As my slide indicated, there were the growth of charters from the 07-08 school year through the end of the 11-12 school year has been approximately 18.9% per year. Growth at that level is significant, and in anything, when you have a whole and you cut it into segments, after a while, one portion becomes much less than the other. That is my answer.
So even, I guess, this time next year, because I think Team Academy is looking at 18th Avenue, and I'm assuming it can't maintain capacity for 4,500 students.
They have several buildings in Newark, as you know. They have their own as well as
Are they at max capacity as well?
locations that they're renting. Beg your pardon?
Are they facilities that are underutilization, are going to be coming back to the district again next year for additional facilities?
Mr. Kenny, I indicated that I do not know what will happen next year, so that is the answer.
Mr. Kenny, if I may, do you have any other question that's urgent right now? Because I would like to ask a couple of questions.
Oh, sure.
And then I'd like to just ask board members if they could please hold the rest of their questions until after public participation. And when each agenda item comes up, if there are any pressing questions at that time, you will still have the opportunity.
Madam Chair, this is the last question. There was a follow-up to. If we do not approve the charters this evening and we vote it down, will the buildings that are identified for charters be opened up for NPS usage?
NPS does not have the students to fill those buildings at this point in time. As I indicated, there are approximately 6,000, Madam Chair. There are approximately 6,000 spaces, even with those spaces used,
Well,
that are open and vacant. Our projection indicates that we do not have children to fill all of our seats within the district.
so the projection is also based on, I'm not sure if you can hear me or not. The projection is also
I'm sorry,
based.
I can't hear you, Mr. Kenny.
I guess the projections from the charters are based on actual leasing facilities. So if they don't have a facility to lease, then the students who either apply or admitted or accept, I'm not sure exactly what happened as of today, they would have to come back into the district and we would have to provide educational services for them. Is that also correct?
There is a clause in the charter school law that indicates if there are emergent needs, that districts will, work with charters to provide space for a one-year term. That is part of the law today.
Ms. Wilson, one question regarding the presentation. I believe that you said that with the Dr. Martin Luther King, North Star into Dr. Martin Luther King, I think I heard you say that there was no right of first refusal with that. Is that correct?
There is. I was corrected after our chart was incorrect. There is right of first refusal, which means should the district choose to sell that building, they have first right of refusal.
Right,
Madam
thank you.
Chair,
Okay.
I would note that we need to begin public participation.
Absolutely. I just have one more question, and that question is, but with the other charter schools not being considered at this time for whatever reason, is the Paulo Fieri Charter School the only school or program that would be occupying Burnett Street School this year if this is approved?
No, we already have a charter that
Great
was
Oak.
approved last year for multiple years. Great Oaks Charter would also be occupying, Burnett Street School.
So it would just be the two then?
At this point in time, yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We will now move to the public participation part of the meeting. Please be clear. Please be clear that the public participation will last for 45 minutes only, and please speak on the agenda items only. Speaking time will be 3 minutes, and that will be a hard 3 minutes. At this time, before we begin public speaking, I have noted that Councilwoman Crump is in the audience. Is Councilwoman Crump still here? Okay. Are there any other elected officials in the House who wish to speak?
I agree. I agree.
Councilwoman Crump. Councilwoman Crump.
Yes, yeah, I'm here. Madam President,
I'm sorry, Councilwoman Crump, what I was going to say is that I was going to allow you the privilege of speaking first, and that your time will not count against the 45 minutes that is allowed to the general public. We would, however, ask you to please adhere to the 3 minutes that is allotted. When public participation begins, we will alternate sides for speakers. Councilwoman Crump.
thank you, Madam President. I will respect the community from which I come in terms of monitoring the amount of time that I use to speak. To the honorable members of the board, to staff who are before me, and to our state-appointed superintendent. Before I begin my comments, I just want to say that I understand that there are a number of parents from charter schools who are present on this evening, and that's a good thing. We need to understand that we cannot allow what is happening to divide us as a community and a city. It is by design, because only through dividing us can they conquer us. And so we will take our eye off the prize, which is a quality education for every one of our children here in the great city of Newark. In 2003, I retired after 42 years as a teacher of children with special needs. Yes, and I had a ball. As a result of my tenure, children were, are, and always will be a priority. And so I appear before you tonight because I can no longer remain on the sidelines and say nothing publicly about what is happening in our school district. Until state takeover, and I was around at that time, the district had its challenges and problems, just as other urban communities were experiencing. However, during the 15-plus years of the hostile takeover of our district, the state has continued to blame the district for its decline in student achievement and preparation. The rules and regulations which governed our system came from the state. So let's not get it twisted. We are not to blame. Parents are not to blame. It is the state that is to blame. In this masquerade that we are going through currently, it is obvious to me that there is a plan to systematically dismantle and destroy our public school system and leave it open for hostile corporate and for-profit takeover. There is proof, not conjecture, there is proof that relationships between Acting Commissioner Cerf and the Public-Private Strategy Group is a clear conflict of interest and should not be allowed to benefit from any of the recommendations that are being presented. As the state superintendent moves forward in this charade called reform, someone is going to profit, and someone is not going to profit: our children. The new owners of the buildings we sell will use public dollars to fix public buildings and ride off with a newly renovated facility that they can now rent or sell for profit. What also frightens me is that neighborhoods and ethnicities are being pitted one against the other. I want Barringer 9 to remain whole, just as I want Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. School to remain whole. I was appalled today to learn that Barringer 9 is no longer being closed. Why? Did not the parents, the principal, Dr. Glenn Wilson, make a persuasive argument on behalf of the school? I was there. The parents, the teachers, and the students were awesome. So this begs the question as to what tipped the scales in favor of Behringer 9. It is probably by design that this decision was made so that there would be friction which will divide us, take our focus off of our children so they can conquer us. And that's how you do it. You divide and conquer. We cannot allow this to happen. We know who the enemies are. We must fight them with our last breath. We must save our children and save the Newark public schools. Just a quick aside, and I am going to take my seat because there are others who have, who feel as passionately as I do. When it comes to, and this is a blanket statement for all of the schools that are being discussed and their status is, their particular status is being decided upon tonight. The new owner, whomever it will use public monies to fix public buildings, and they will write off in our newly renovated buildings that they can sell or lease for profit. I said it once, and I'm saying it twice. $5.25, ladies and gentlemen, per square foot is nothing for our children. And so I am opposed. I stand categorically opposed to any position of selling or leasing any of our school buildings. Please forgive me, this is very passionate for me. I find it so interesting that my friends who live in the suburbs are holding on to the character of their public schools while we have a district, and I'm not blaming the school board, I have to tell you that. I'm proud of many of you, but I will say that for those of you who are willing to sell our children for profit, shame on you, shame on you, shame on you.
Amen.
Do they have to say their name and address?
Yeah.
Could you say, can you read the guidelines before we start?
Okay.
Am I next?
Mr. Zartarian, could you please just review the guidelines for speakers?
Yes, Madam Chair. As the chair previously noted, this is a special meeting. So tonight we have a limited agenda. There's a maximum of 3 minutes per speaker, and the comments should be confined to the agenda items only, which is the charter leases. Total public participation from this point on, again, as the chair indicated, will last for 45 minutes. Time limits for all speakers will be adhered to. There will be no sharing or granting of speaking time to others. Please give your names and addresses when you approach the podium. Examples of unacceptable behavior that will not be permitted include but are not limited to naming district employees and engaging in personal attacks, slurs, excessive loudness, calling out, yelling, generally disruptive behavior, attempting to disrupt the meeting or inciting others to do so. Public participation is intended to allow the individual members of the public the opportunity to address the board and the administration on issues of public concern, not as a forum for two-way dialogue with the board members. The superintendent or designee or chair may respond to questions either at the end of the public participation section or responses may be provided at a later time. The superintendent or chair may interrupt any speaker or terminate any individual's speaking privilege if the speaker's comments are disruptive or obscene. An individual may be cautioned that a personally directed statement may be slanderous or defaming, and the individual may be liable for his or her comments. Attempts to hijack or filibuster the proceedings, repeated interrupting or badgering of the board chair or district officials, repetitive or truculent speech, or other disregard of the rules of form will not be tolerated, may subject the individual or group to removal from the meeting. If necessary, the meeting may be adjourned.
Thank you. All speakers must state their name and address. We will start with the first speaker to my right.
Hello, my name is Sheila Montague. My address is 481 South 13th Street in Newark. The first point I want to share with you guys, I'm speaking on behalf of Annette Austin in her absence for the NTA. And her only issue, or our issue, is basically, I don't see the logic in extending a 7-year straight lease to any school that's doing, right now they're in the process of experimentation. I don't see the logic in that, and from what I've heard today, I still don't see it. So if possible, I'd like someone to explain that to me, because it appears as though that if the experiment is not going well, then we have no means to intervene or redirect what's going on if it's not working. Also, as district leader, I'm speaking for my district also, and a couple of things that I want to share. Number one, we don't want Science High co-located. And we're very passionate about that. We do not want the school co-located. So if it's any other options that we could explore, we would like to do that. We don't want to move forward with that. In terms of, now I want to make a comment in terms of being a Newark Public Schools teacher as well. I've watched the educational process decline over this past year. I went from teaching in a classroom to breaking up fights, to it being a lot of just disruptions and things of that nature going on. And I saw no help at all. I've reached out and emailed almost every single one of you. I've reached out to people to where at the end of the year, it didn't even symbolize a school anymore. There was just ongoing traffic in the hall, even from such things as the novels that usually went home. We didn't see those novels this year in the district. I'd like to know what happened to those. And to, I guess, to sum up a couple of other things, you said earlier, someone said earlier that we're going to be planning to share best practices between the charter schools and the Newark public schools. I'd like to know how that's going to happen when we're not doing that internally right now. And lastly, but not least, I feel like what I'm hearing today is really just a justification in terms of the PowerPoint presentation for an already confirmed plan to move forward with charter schools. And I just want to know who's going to secure the students who are not going to be enrolled in charter school. That's my concern. Who's going to look out for them? Who's going to have their best interests at heart? And I'm hoping that at least one, if not more of you, can share that with me today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Montague. To all speakers, please be sure that you can find your comments to the agenda item this evening, which is the charter leases. Thank you. Next speaker.
Good evening. My name is Junius Williams, 110 Warren Street, Newark, New Jersey, taxpayer, long-term Newark resident. I'm here to talk about this lease, and it's full of holes and damaging propositions. I don't have time in 3 minutes to talk about all of it, but some of it just was so egregious and so hurtful, I thought I had to stand up here and say something. Number one, this is a real estate scheme to put public property into the hands of private people. This lease allows the tenant, which is nonprofit, to transfer or assign its interest to a for-profit corporation or individual. They can then go and apply for a federal grant, which is public money, fix the building up, deduct the cost of the reconstruction from the purchase price, which means they get the building for almost next to nothing. And let me show you how that works in the time that I have left. It says that, well, let me just jump to one point, the point about the federal program. I have to take issue with that because the QZAB money is available to the district. I call them. I talked to the director of the program. There was $32 million allocated for New Jersey. $14 million of it has been assigned only to charter schools. As a matter of fact, the director was surprised, why hasn't the Department of Education at the state issued some kind of ruling which says that you have to bring in the districts to get the rest of the money. There's $17 million still unaccounted for. Now, I see a lot of people nodding their heads and scoffing, and I have due respect for these people, but I did call them. I talked to them on the phone. We are eligible for this money. We are eligible for this money. It is not even a loan anymore. It's not a bond anymore. Why? It's a grant now because the Obama administration found out that a lot of districts weren't coming forward around the country because they couldn't pay the money back, so they made it into a grant. It's now a grant. All you have to do is pay 10%. Now, if it be said that the city of Newark can no longer fix its own schools, then why doesn't the state use its capacity under this grant, since it runs this district, to fix up some district schools? I have nothing against charter schools. I want to make that clear. But I'm saying $14 million for charters, zero for regular public schools. Something's wrong in this equation. The private individual or corporation that will walk away with this building can then even rent the building back to the Newark Public Schools. And we have no choice but to pay it because they own the land based on this lease. Now, if I have a couple of more minutes, the default program. One of the things that it says in the default, I got to point this out, it shall not be considered an event of default if tenant tries to cure that problem within 30 days and keeps on trying. In other words, if you have a default for some of the provisions as was spoken, as long as you indicate that you're trying to solve the problem, it's no longer a default. I never heard of a lease like that in my life.
Mr. Williams, thank you very much.
I got it, man.
Next speaker.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Crystal Caceres. As well as we all know, Cammie Anderson continues with her renewal plan at Camden District School. I want to thank you for breaking our hearts for the tears that I cry every day because she didn't give us a chance. Thank you for hurting us. You took away half our staff, our principal, and now our students are transferring out, so that means I'm left with a couple of friends and people to look up to. I want to know if you are familiar with the quote, I believe the children are our future, teach them well and lead the way. This is a quote for you and the quote that you need to look to. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Leah Owens, 189 Huntington Street, teacher at Central High School, chair of Newark Education Workers Caucus. I think that there is a section of the lease that really is the thesis of this entire meeting and that all the board members should take into account as they think about the votes that they're going to give this evening. And it goes, throughout the life of the lease, the school's operation must not interfere in any significant way with the ability of the district to deliver the highest quality educational services to its students and the attainment of the district's education goals, allowing the district to meet the best interests of Newark children. There really is no way by leasing these buildings and to the length of these leases that we are not going to infringe upon the success of the Newark Public Schools. The schools that have been moved, particularly Westside Academy, NAF Academy, Behringer 9, even though that's off the table, but at one point in time, Ninth Grade Academy was moved out of the main building. I was a teacher at Behringer High School at that time, and it mainly had to do with overpopulation. I did not have my own classroom, and as soon as the bell rung, I had to run out and go to another class because another teacher was coming in, another set of students was coming in, and that had a detrimental effect on the quality of education that I could deliver as a teacher because my students couldn't find me during the day. If they had asked me a question, they didn't know where I was. So all of that should be taken into account. Also, schools were moved and populations were moved to keep the integrity of academic programs, like at Westside. At first, it was just a Ninth Grade Academy at the old Morton Street, but then the district decided to change it to NAF Academy so they could keep that academy functioning 9th through 12th grade. So there's been a lot of instability in the district over the years, and I think we need to take that into account. Board Member Kenny has been asking over and over again for an impact study. Board Member Moore also asked for that this evening. What is happening to these students when they're moved from one school to another? And if we can't answer that question, then we shouldn't be making decisions about leasing more schools and closing more schools and dislocating more students. So a lot of questions about where can we find this money. So first of all, we can fight for the funding that we have a right to. first and foremost. And usually what's probably going to have to happen for that, it seems, is that we're going to need to have local control back so that the community can hire and fire the superintendent, because that is our right. If a superintendent and that administration is not listening to the community, not abiding by their wishes, then we have a right to remove that person. But under state control, we have very little power to be able to do things like that. We can also stop pushing for plans, internally on the board at 2 Cedar Street, pushing for plans that deplete the district of resources and the populations of our students. So we need to stop advocating for that. It's just creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. We have no space, so we have to rent space. Oh, we rent space, they grew, now we're losing more students, we have to rent more space. It's just, it doesn't make sense. It's just circular logic. Also, we need to capitalize on the reforms that are currently in place so that we can see some actual success of those schools, such like the Global Village School Zone, shutting down 2 schools that are part of a multi-year plan. How are we going to be able to see if there's success there if we're just closing the schools? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Owens. Next speaker.
Yes, my name is Julissa Vasquez. I live at 120 Littleton Avenue. And it seems that every time I attend these meetings, it seems that the public schools are left for last, and you're putting charter schools first. I don't have nothing against charter schools. We have good charter schools, we have bad charter schools. We got good public schools, and we have bad public schools. But every time I attend these meetings, it seems like the public schools are staying behind. They're not putting them first. If you give something to charter school, why not give it to public schools? Why not? If they have this, we should have that. Be fair, you know? And then to continue on the renewal to these schools, you're saying you're thinking about the students, but you're not. These students are suffering. Every day I speak to parents, they said they're not interested in this renewal plan at Candace Street. They're transferring their students out. Last weekend, we had a meeting with the new principal. Only 7 parents showed. You know why? Because the parents thought that they didn't really care to meet this new principal. They didn't really care what the new environment is going to be there next year. They said they'd rather transfer their kids out or move to another state. I see that on field. So how are we fixing this problem? I don't see how is this working out. You know, these teachers, you're moving them away to another school. It's unfair. It's unfair to the students. It's unfair to the staff members. You know, think about the child first. And let's remember that. Students first. Child first. You know? It's unacceptable. Every time that I come to these meetings, I see that there's nothing resolved. It's like, oh, I'm going to do whatever. I don't care what y'all said. But you know what? Come September, if I still see this the same way, we're going to make sure we're going to remove Kamini Anderson out.